Hey guys, today we're talking about politics in the 1890s. Thanks for joining me on a snow day. Sorry, AP, you gotta work all the time. We got a test coming. Snow days can't make it wait. Um, Essentially what we're going to be talking about today is the major political issues of the 1890s, in which you have an essay that you might be writing on this coming Friday. So keep that in mind. Today we're going to be mostly focusing on the silver issue and farmers in politics. Our first president of this time period is Benjamin Harrison, one of our forgettable presidents, sorry. And what was passed during his presidency is the Sherman Silver Purchase Act. Silver purchasing is the hot issue right now. Should the federal government purchase silver and put it into circulation, or put it towards backing the paper money that was largely inflated during this time period? And we had already seen the federal government act in the Bland-Allison Act, sometimes called the Grand Bland Plan, to buy silver. I think it was like $2 million worth of silver a month, and coin it to put backing to our very inflated currency. And so essentially, this doubles that amount of silver that the federal government will buy and use to back currency. Pro-silver advocates, silverites, they even wanted more, and they saw this as a compromise, and they actually will agree to a tariff, which they're not a giant fan of, in exchange for this Silver Purchase Act. But in result, it didn't really inflate the currency. It didn't really fix the issue. And the reason that many people want silver in circulation to back the money is to that inflation, to keep it down, and many of them end up being debtors that want to pay back their debts at a more not inflated rate. Time period, we have the McKinley Tariff Bill as well, passed the same year, and this was the exchange. We'll give you the Sherman Silver Purchase Act if we get the McKinley Tariff Bill. It's kind of like the Republicans' reward. They wanted a tariff. So it raised tariffs to like unheard of levels, 48% tariff. And it also gave a subsidy to sugar planters. Now that means that there was a surplus of sugar in the economy, and it was being sold at very, very, very low rates because there was just so much. So government subsidy pays farmers not to grow crops. And I think it was like 2 cents per acre that they stop growing sugar or grow something else. And that ensures that the farmers make money, and that the surplus of sugar goes down, meaning farmers can sell it for more, meaning they're going to make more money. And that does not last forever, but we will see government subsidies for crops later on in American history. This is laying the foundation for it. It raised tariffs on agricultural products, and it was, for the most part, just not very popular. McKinley, our future president, actually lost his congressional seat after this, because that is a really difficult to overcome 48% tariff on almost all goods and agricultural goods. But the tariff issues that we've seen before in American history, they're just not as important as this hot silver issue, which, why is the money supply in the federal government regulating the money supply such a hot issue? Inflation and people having to pay more for goods is what gets them fired up about it. All of these issues are laid down on the background of issues with our farmers and the rise of the populist party. So how does that begin? Oftentimes back in these times, it started as the Grange Party, based off of something called Granger Laws. So Granger Laws, down here at the bottom, you'll see Granger politics. They want public control over private business to help the regular old Joes, the general welfare of people. And most of these laws will end up getting overturned in courts, but Granger laws are laws that the public wants to check the excesses of corporations because they're hurting regular people. For example, the National Grange of the Patrons of Husbandry, this political party kind of, they're farmers, and essentially it's stimulating the minds of farmers by education in kind of like a conference or parties or lectures, fraternal activities. You can bring your family. So it kind of starts after church on Sunday. Well, let's go eat some chicken. And then they start talking about the issues they're having. Well, this railroad is charging me this much for shipping, and I'm not even shipping it that far, but they charge the same to ship it all the way to the East Coast. And this grain storage place is charging me outrageous prices. And a lot of people getting fired up about these things at these parties and these dinners. And then they move to do something about it. And the thing that they do about it are called farmer alliances or cooperatives. And so cooperatives are when people come together and use their resources to purchase or to bargain for something. So they will bargain with grain elevators, which is a mechanized way of like processing their grains. Grain elevators and dairy places to store their stuff before it gets shipped. They'll come together and say, we're not going to pay your prices. All these farmers came together and said so. So bring the price down, essentially. It's kind of like collective bargaining in a sense. And stores and supplies, they would go in together and buy a lot of seeds for a cheap price and then divide them amongst this farmers cooperative. And those are just like really, really simple examples. Farmer cooperatives are much more complex than that, but that's about all I'm going to give you on that. So these farmers coming together and doing something about the issues they're facing when put up against these giant railroad corporations and storage corporations and commercial farms, that's the rise of populism among the farmers. Let me kick back here for a minute, though. Greenback Labor Party is a little bit different. Greenback Labor Party is more about the money supply issue and less about getting kicked by big corporations issue. They like the inflation and the soft money of the greenbacks that were around during the Civil War and that were super inflated and not worth a lot in the North and the South. And they also want to help laborers improve their conditions. So Greenback Labor, put it together, Greenback Labor Party. And they poll over 1 million votes. They get 14 members to Congress, and this is their goal, essentially. Some of them will push for populism and Granger laws as well, but for the most part, they are a labor party. So this rise of farmers' alliances and cooperatives and the Granger laws, those became more and more popular, so much so that we're going to see populism like enter people's vernacular. And these farmers' alliances in the South and Midwest, they increasingly voice their discontent against the federal government for not protecting them and against those big companies for exploiting them, in a sense. So those loose farmer alliances become tighter and tighter and tighter, and eventually we're going to get a political party from it. They will support or join, many of them will support or join the Knights of Labor cause, labor union, because they support those similar goals, like checking the power of those giant corporations and helping like the poor regular man and better work hours and better pay, those sort of things. They support even that, though that doesn't always directly affect the farmers. And they also support that hard money idea of coining silver, the government buying more and more silver and coining it and putting it into circulation to kind of manage the inflation issue that's going on. Actually, these issues make it all the way up to a national third party, the Populist Party. So those loose farmers alliances kind of tighten up. They attract recruits from the Greenback Labor Party, from the Knights of Labor, labor union, from people that support the Granger laws and the Granger Party. And they'll actually get some representatives elected to Congress and some ideas pushed forth, like a sub-treasury where they could store their stuff and then borrow money against their stuff. So when their stuff sells, then they can pay the money back. None of that really goes into effect, but they're getting to the point where they're more well known and they're actually a third party that could affect an election. One of their issues, though, one of the downfalls of this party is that there was some anti-African American sentiment, especially in the South, in those Southern farmer alliances that joined the Populist Party. So, like, widespread fear of African Americans in those farmer alliances kind of cuts back on involvement of African American in farmer alliances. And remember, many African Americans are sharecroppers and small farmers themselves. And so they had this big base of people that could have helped them push policies, even though African Americans didn't have that much political power in the South. But they were largely ignored because of race issues and segregation of the time period. And so that threatened the populists in a way of other national politics not listening to them because they include African Americans, but it threatened populists in a sense of they didn't include a large power base that they could have. So we just see it getting worse and worse in the South racially, and this is just an example of that leaking onto the stage of national politics. So we will have someone run in the 1892 election from the Populist Party, and they run on what's called the Omaha platform, and Omaha, Nebraska, like that, which is like a Midwest state where a lot of that populist sentiment had been growing, and a lot of supporters from Farmers Alliances for the Populist Party in Nebraska. And so here's essentially what it is. They want free and unlimited coinage of silver for the federal government to buy and coin silver at a ratio of 16-1. So coining a lot of silver versus how much money is out there, like paper money. They want a graduated income tax. That means the more you make, the more the federal government taxes you, and that money is put into like funds to help the poor and middle class. So like redistributing wealth is kind of what they wanted to take it as, which was very, I guess, scandalous for the time. They wanted the government to own telephone, railroads, and telegraph companies because they were getting cheated essentially by those corporations that own those things and being charged outrageous prices. And they wanted the government to take over those and allow more fair pricing for that. They also wanted initiative and referendum, which are political terms. Initiative means the people can put forth a bill, and referendum meaning the people can vote whether or not a bill would go into action. We're going to see those come in later, and those ideas are actually used in modern day politics. So the Omaha platform is actually very modern, 1890, but we see things in here that we have today. A postal savings bank, and they also wanted the government to stop giving land to railroads. Remember, the government would give land to railroads instead of paying them to build the railroads and say, here, you can build your railroad and then you have 20 acres on either side and you can sell off to settlers. Well, those railroad companies were making big bucks off of this and charging settlers massive amounts of money. So the Populist Party wanted them to sell railroad property instead of like to railroad companies to actual settlers to cut down on the price and like that middleman. They want a direct election of senators, which we have nowadays. In their time, the representatives from your state chose your senators that go to Congress. So like your state legislator chose those senators, and they wanted more control of who's going to Washington, D.C. to represent them. And of course, because they have some influence from other labor unions, they will fight for an 8-hour workday, kind of like the Knights of Labor do.